We're talking about something that I think everyone can relate to, intergenerational ministry across the board, from programs to music to outreach. And I have an incredible panel with me today. As the mother of 3 boys, this is a very comfortable setting. So men, thank you for being here with us. And I'd like for you just to introduce yourself very quickly. Stephen, let's start with you.
I'm Stephen Abbott. I pastor currently the Grand Haven Church of the Nazarene, but I've had experience at other churches as young adult pastor, working with college students, and worked on 3 college campuses as an academic advisor and resident director, resident educator, that kind of thing. So spent a lot of my life with college students and young adults, but currently a senior pastor.
I'm Mark Fuller. I'm at the Grove City Church of the Nazarene. Started out actually in youth ministry and college ministry, year-old stomping grounds in Olathe, and pastored in Texas, and then 18 years in Phoenix. So we've been 8 years in Grove City, and it's been a great journey transitioning this great church in an intergenerational way. So I'm pretty excited about this conversation here today.
And I'm Harlan Moore. I'm Minister of Worship Arts at Bethany First Church in Oklahoma, land of tornadoes. And I've been at this for about 40 years, mainly in local churches. Did a little stint with Lowness as director, and but I love the local church and I love what I do very, very much.
Well, we're very excited to have you here as part of our journey through General Assembly. And, you know, we have a conversation board over here, and I walked past and saw this one that someone had put up. It says, "What does real community look like?" And I thought, what a beautiful question, because it can take on so many different forms. And today, as we're discussing things, I wanted to kind of take a 3-prong approach of a what, why, and how. And for the what, just to make sure we're all on the same page, we're not necessarily speaking multi-generational. That's what's happening in this room right now. We have children and young adults and senior citizens all in the same room together. But intergenerational comes when that interaction is not only intentional, but brings about a growth in faith and in strength of character and just finding their calling in life. So as we continue on with the intergenerational piece, just keep that in mind. And now to the why, I really want to hear from you. Why do you feel this is so important in our world today, the way our society is, the way our family structures are constantly changing, and why churches need to create this idea of intergenerational community as a priority in their planning and their budgets and their conversations?
Intergenerational to me is a little counterculture to where the church has been, because we have tended to create ministries that are age specific, and because of that we have kind of grouped ourselves within the church according to our ages. And so I think we kind of set ourselves up for a problem that we're now trying to figure out, and how to break through those silos now and begin to see people connect. I know my stepmom passed away just last December. Well in her 70s, and toward the end she's saying, you know, I just don't know any of the younger people in the church anymore. I just don't have that relationship with them. And in a large church setting, that's often the case. Smaller churches, it's maybe not as difficult because people tend to connect and know each other more. But especially in the larger the church, the harder it is to make those intergenerational connections. So point number 1, I think we need to be intentional about creating intergenerational opportunities for people.
For me, the why is really obvious when you look at our culture, the breakdown of the family. You know, for generations, it was, where do young people find those healthy role models? It's in their extended family. Well, now that's gone. Yeah. And one of my young leaders said to me some time back, he said, "Pastor, where do you go to find that?" You know, well, I thought the church. Yeah. That's where it should be. That's the perfect place for young men and women to find those healthy role models that they didn't have as a family. So I think the why is very obvious, and the opportunity is incredible, but the challenges are pretty ominous too. So, but that's the why, I think, because we need that.
I tend to, I would agree with both of you guys, absolutely. I think it's totally vital for us to develop an intragenerational church. I think that's how God envisioned his people from day one. When he calls Abraham, he doesn't gather a whole bunch of different groups of people together. He calls one man and builds a family out of him. He constantly relates to us. How do we talk to him? Our Father. That's a generational term. He comes to us in other familial terms through the imagery of marriage or other things like that that have to do with the generational and intragenerational connections and relationships that we cultivate together. The siloing effect of ministry that with our age group development programs, while it's provided some significant services to the church, has also kind of tended to reflect our culture maybe more than the true biblical mandate of Scripture. And so while there is a vital need, especially in larger settings, where you have lots of people to manage and move in certain directions, I think it absolutely is God's ideal for us to be related together as family.
Now, I don't know how your churches are specifically structured, but I know I walked into a church at one point and was asked, am I married or am I single? That put me in a place. How old was I? Did I have children? And I suddenly was put in this box. Well, then you go to this class, this Sunday school class. Now, I understand why they did that. They did that because they knew I would find people I would relate to and could support where I was in my life. But that small group community, to me, is different than the larger church picture. And so I want to be cautious that we're not going against that way. But I really become concerned when people walk into our church. What do we say to them in the way of, this is a family, this is where we're going to support you no matter where you've come from or what age group you fit into or whether or not you have children? How do we create a church that just looks and sounds and acts as though we're all in this together, even if I'm 60 or I'm single or I'm a young person in the youth group? How do they do that? Talk to the churches out there. Come on, show your smarts. Here we go.
I don't know how smart I am.
You are.
I've got the problems figured out, but I don't have the answers yet. But you know, the challenge we faced at Grove City, my generation, I know why I'm on this panel. I'm of the older generation, okay?
No, you're the wiser generation.
Yeah, well, you're very kind. But we love programs. So if you want to do something intergenerational, it has to be an intergenerational program, right? Show me when, the time, the program, and I'll line up. Your generation is like, if it's a program, it's like, yeah, I don't want any part of that at all. It's got to happen organically. It's got to happen naturally. And on top of that, the enemy does not want this to happen. He knows how powerful it is. Every Paul needs a Timothy. Every Timothy needs a Paul. And if we can figure out how to bring them together in a variety of ways, naturally, let the relationships happen. So this has come from us, you know, we've just been praying about this a lot of prayer. One of the most exciting things happening in our church now is we're doing something really innovative, Kasey. We're having a midweek prayer service. Can you believe that?
You're kidding.
Isn't that something? Pretty
People
exciting.
Stopping what they're doing
midweek prayer
and
service.
Just praying?
Yeah. And we have 80-year-olds and 20-year-olds praying
Beautiful.
Together in groups. I mean, it's just, and God is knitting their hearts together. We didn't program it that way, but we said, God, you got to show us how. And, you know, so I think, too, for me, I had to model that. If we're going to be intergenerational, the leader has to lead. Right. And so, you know, I've been pouring my life into our young staff and mentoring them and our young adults, young leaders, and it's brought new energy to me. It's brought a new passion and fire to me. And hopefully I've been able to say something worthwhile to them. But I think it has to be modeled. There has to be a spiritual dimension to this. It's got to happen naturally. It can't happen with a program. It's not that simple.
But would you say you gave your church family an opportunity to connect versus a programmed? Like, what is the difference between those two? Is there one? Perhaps there isn't. But what attracted those 20-year-olds to come and those 80-year-olds to come? Was it the content, that it was prayer? Was it, how did you do that?
Well, prayer is something that God has to put in the heart of people. And He's starting to do that cross-generationally. But I think, you know, we oftentimes try to bring it together in worship, and that's probably the hardest place to have intergenerational ministry. And that's where we try to go first. Yeah. I think we need to honor people's heart worship, not make them feel mad when they come to church, you know. Then they're upset about everything, and then anything you try is going to be a downer. Yeah. So honor that heart worship. help them experience God on the weekend. But in prayer or in service opportunities, great opportunity to bump the generation together. Sharing life skills. I mean, good night. I need help with all this technology. You know, these young guys, it just comes naturally to them. I sit there and I've got to read the manual, do this, all, you know, so they help me. And then maybe, you know, we have some of our guys that are good at construction or some service activity they can pour into these young men. It's just a variety of ways, but I think you just got to provide opportunities, I would think, for that to happen.
I want to tag off of what you said about worship and the challenge of intergenerational worship, because that often is the starting point. Oh, we're going to get everybody together in the same room and we're going to force each other to like each other's music, when in actuality it's what happens outside of the sanctuary that makes that possible. So if we have the kind of relationships that people have invested in each other, they're less willing to be critical, for one thing, and I think they're more willing to be open because they know the person that likes this kind of song, and they go, well, that ministers to them, they need that, and I'll get my turn later. I think there's a willingness to give and take a little bit more when those relationships are built outside of the sanctuary, and I will agree also on the missional aspect, because we've seen some really cool things happen when we've had families go on mission trips together. And kids getting to know somebody else's grandpa, and Aunt so-and-so getting to know this other kid over here. There is this cross-connection that happens because everybody's out of their comfort zone, so you're all kind of needing each other. Yeah. And there begins to be these bonds that form that when they come back, they're the best friends in the world, and that stays with them too, because they know each other at that level rather than just, you know, top down or whatever it may be.
Well, and it sounds like you're both also saying it's more than just a Sunday event, and we have to think outside of our programming or our time in worship together. And it's one of those things. This just brings me to the point too of the youth, and you may have some ideas of how you've seen this happen before, but I always think a poor, 50-year-old woman walking into a room full of teenagers has to be one of the scariest things for her ever. There's not a whole lot in common, no one sews in the room, no one, and so for her to go outside of her comfort zone, she has to be set up to succeed. So what do we do for our youth and for our older generation to give them those tools to help them feel as though they can walk into that situation and nurture that relationship? Does it need to be a missions trip? Does it need to be a service project? Does it need to be a prayer time? Or is it one of those situations where the climate of the culture changes to the point that we leave our pew, we leave where we typically sit, and we go and we sit next to someone else, and in greeting time we meet them, and then we ask them to lunch, and like you said, the organic side of the natural flow starts to happen. Our churches that are out there, how do we help our pastors and our leaders of our youth take those tools and share them with their people and apply them? And what tools do they need to take?
I think if you're serious about truly being an intra-generational church, then you're going to have to sew that idea into every fabric of every ministry that you do. And so, if you're at a church with multiple staff, you're going to say, guys, everything we do is going to be done as family. Everything we're going to do is going to be thinking in multi-layers of generational concerns, and how do we get these guys connected? And so, and we're all going to partner together as a team to figure that out. So we're not going to let you go in isolation and leave you to kind of figure this out by yourself, because that actually works against what we're trying to do here. We're trying to create connection. So we're going to start that at the leadership level, and we're going to say, we're going to talk about this together and say, how do we get the whole family of God involved in this, that, or the other project that we feel like we need to be about as a church.
So if you're pastor of your senior citizens group, they have a banquet once a semester together. Are you saying to try to challenge them to how can we include the youth? How can we make this intergenerational? Or do you allow some of those things to be their own time and place? Like, is there a line between those? Is there a balance that needs to be kept?
In some ways, yes, and in some ways, no. I don't know that we'll ever be perfect at that. Certainly the different age levels, because of how influential human developmental theory has become in society, and just the vastness of the society we deal with, we no longer can clump people together like we used to. When you have smaller settings, sometimes you're forced to clump people together. In my church setting, we have 150 people, and the kids, we only have like 2 or 3 divisions for our kids. So we have grade levels, multiple grade levels, conversing with one another, which, you know, presents some problems, but it also presents some real adventures for those kids too, to be relating to older and younger kids, and you're teaching them already how to look outside of their own box, even at a young age like that. If you're serious as a church about being intergenerational, then you sit here and you sort of say, for your teen minister, for your teen pastor, you say, you're gonna need to come up with some ways of serving this older generation, and you're gonna do this, and for a little while it's gonna feel awkward. You're not gonna know what you're doing. You're gonna make mistakes. You're gonna step on toes. You're gonna mess this up a little bit, and we're gonna give you that room to fail sometimes. But you're gonna also get it right, and you're also gonna create some connections that you probably can't even imagine right now between some of our younger kids and some of our older adults in the congregation. We'll help you figure that out, whether it's through a one-to-one discipleship kind of relationship or a more event-oriented kind of thing like a banquet or something like that. Whatever the means are, those are all just things to facilitate the real goal of the connection between the generations. So,
yeah, and then from an older standpoint, you know, how do you help the older generation to really see that the younger generation, not everybody who's under 30 has a sense of entitlement and is narcissistic and all this kind of stuff, you know.
Thank you for putting that out there, because it's true.
No, I'm not looking at you.
They
told me to look at you, but talk to them, okay?
No, I'm glad you said that, because that's true, and I think that generation does get labeled that way. You're right.
That's right. And so I think
every generation gets labeled, right? I mean,
we're labeled. You know, the baby boomers. You could talk all day about us baby boomers, you know. But there's a lot of notions, and there's so much communication out there that's wrong on the internet, and people just make judgments about everybody. And so I'm trying to say, look, to my peers, we need to empower and trust and believe in the young people. People usually rise to what you expect them to be, and if you expect them to be self-centered and narcissistic, they probably will be. But if you really empower them and believe in them and speak that beautiful future and vision of their lives, they take a hold of that. If we lose this generation, Kasey, it will not be because we demand too much. It's because we demand too little. Because we aren't framing. And the message of holiness, man, it is loving God with every fiber of your being. That's the message for now. And that's why Satan's fighting so hard to keep these generations apart, because he knows the power, the synergy that's going to come when you see that. And so I'm trying to say to my peers, look, love on these guys, and it's starting to happen. They're starting to see, wow, these young men, these young women really have a lot to offer, and we're, you know, you got to be secure as a leader. I'm speaking to pastors now, you know, to let that happen. If you're an insecure pastor, you got to hold everything here. You know, Craig Rochelle says if you're passing out tasks, you're developing followers. But if you're passing out authority, you're developing leaders. And when these young generation, they don't just have a place at the table, they are at the main seat of the table. Then they're saying, oh, you're serious about this. You really do trust me.
This really is my responsibility.
This really is my responsibility. That's right.
And when you say, too, that to those people who are willing to go out and try to bridge that gap and make those connections, although youth may be a bit standoffish at first, keep trying, keep going. Go to the next kid. You might connect with that one better. Go to the next one. Don't give up.
Right.
Don't give up.
So much at stake.
Yeah.
And along with that is the willingness to let failure take place. We all made mistakes coming up. I mean, we did. We blew it out of the water many times. I know I did. And to be willing to let younger people come up alongside and say, this, you know, let's do this together. And yeah, you're going to stumble, you're going to fall a little bit, but each time you do it, it gets better. And I think that's a way of encouraging the younger generation to do the willingness to say it's not perfect yet, but you're on the road. We're going to help you.
That's beautiful. Well, I want to turn things a little more personal to your journey as to where you've been to. Fuller Youth Institute put out a thing quite a few years ago, the Sticky Web. I don't know if you've read about that, where they're saying, let's create a web that kind of sticks us all together through the fact that we all want to grow in our faith and our walk with Christ. And they developed the church model of 5 to 1, that there should be 5 adults in every youth or child's life that is stuck to them. And that can be at different levels, so it's not 5 youth group leaders, 5 small group leaders, 5 devotional things. Perhaps one of them is a gentleman that plays golf, and the young man he meets with, they once a month go play golf together, or twice a year. But they are truly invested and know each other. And this adult knows that that teen or child counts and has a connection with them. One of the stories I read was of a single mother who had a son who she wanted to have connections with, and she knew that was most important. And in all their studies they did, they said it starts with the parents at home, knowing how important this was and sending their child into their church and supporting their church in these goals. But every time her son made a connection with a man in his life who was a very special mentor, she took a picture of that man and her son and put it in one of those collage frames that every picture's framed. But it hung in the hallway, and when he exited his room, he saw it there. And even the blank picture frames, she would say, that's where the next connection for you is going to be. God has someone else out there for you. So I wondered, in your development, in your life, even now, who are those 3, 4, 5 people that came alongside you in your church or in your community that really made a connection with you? How did they do that? And how did that connection not only benefit you, but do you feel like you were able to reciprocate that back in a way that maybe wouldn't have happened if they hadn't reached out and taken that chance and made you who you are today? Do I need to give you more think time as the educator in me
probably
comes out?
I tend to speak before I think anyway. So.
Oh, good. Me too.
I'm receiving a tremendous gift this summer. The church is giving me several weeks off as a sabbatical. I've never had that before. Wow. And almost 40 years of ministry, and this is a huge blessing to me, because I'm going to take some time and go to several people around the country who have invested in my life. And in the remaining years of ministry I have, I'm going to go back to, these are some of the people that helped me at the very beginning. And I'm going to go back to them and say, okay, you knew me then. Look at where we are now, and what do you see remains to be done in my life? And for them to just continue speaking words, I just value them even now, even after so many years of ministry, because they were so rich in mentoring my life. And I just pray I can be that same kind of person to others, you know, to be able to speak back into their lives as well. But it's even fun now, at 60 years of age, to have those kind of relationships where I'm just still hungry for more from others who have gone before me. That's very important to me right now.
Incredible. Yeah. You guys have anybody?
Well, you know, my dad has been just my hero. He was my pastor growing up. I'm a PK. Then he was my boss, because he was my district superintendent for a while. And then he moved to Arizona. He was on my staff. I was no longer Gene Fuller's son. He was, you know, I was no longer Gene Fuller's, he was Mark Fuller's dad, okay? So, but I've watched my dad in all those relationships as he was growing. He's grown older very well. And he moved from all of those different levels of relationship very smoothly. And I guess what I've learned from that in my own life, I want to move, instead of being the guy who's now the senior pastor of this church, you know, follow me, I'm the leader. And now I'm saying, no, I want to be the guy that empowers these young leaders. I want to give them enough rope to lead, but not enough rope to hang themselves, so to speak.
That's important.
I want to be empowering them and reproducing that. And so I saw that model in my dad and Paul Cunningham. I could drop some more names. Bill Birch. Those guys just really poured into me. And like Harlan, I feel like if God will be gracious enough to give me an opportunity to pass the baton, I want to do that well. I don't want to drop the baton in that process. That's the most critical part in a relay race. You can have the best athletes in the world, but if they drop the baton, it's over.
Yeah, that's where the transitions come in. Whether you're transitioning from elementary to junior high or from college to life, we have to be there for each other. And it's wonderful you had that. Steve, anybody in your life that kind of came alongside you? And
I've had quite a few, like both of you guys, that have invested in my life. I think when I separated out into the different sort of maybe age categories of my life, is my mic on there?
Right.
Okay, a little closer. Okay. Into some of the different age categories, some teachers when I was very young, some coaches when I was in my teen years, and a couple teachers there, and a youth leader that really kind of invested in me or taught me some new things about God that gave me a new perspective. And then in college, there were several people. Because I went to a Nazarene college, I kind of ran into people that it was really their job to be looking out for opportunities to mentor others. And that was kind of the nature of their job in a significant way. Even though they were there to teach or they were there to run a certain program or whatever, the real goal was to invest in the lives of young people. And so several people in that setting took me under their wing, saw some potential or a need there for some development, and just took me under their wing of their own accord and said, this is a person I'm going to invest in. Now that I'm a little older, I've begun praying more for those things. I didn't know what I needed when I was younger. Now I know I need that presence in my life of older folks. And so whether it's my parents or my district superintendent or another guy who's a few years down the road from me in ministry, I'm praying pretty consistently. I have for the past 4 or 5 years that, God, I really need you to bring the right people into my life to teach me the lessons that I need to know. And I want you to make me aware enough to be able to learn those lessons from those people when they come across my path. So now it's really more a matter of prayer than it has been ever before.
Well, and I love that each of you touched on the fact that this idea of intergenerational community starts at the leadership level and also starts outside of Sunday, on our knees praying. And, for anyone who sees this panel discussion or who has heard us talking today, I think we can all be in agreement that it takes every person being available and aware of the Holy Spirit, tapping them on the shoulder and saying, go out on that ledge, reach out to that student, reach out to that young person, that mother who just needs a little extra help. We might look like we have it all together, but we need help and we need each other. And, there was a Gallup poll that said that 40% of 18 to 29-year-olds who attended church as high school students do not continue attending church during their college years. And only 20% of those return to the church family after college. And it just burdens my heart to think when we have them in our sanctuary, in our youth room, in our worship setting, what are we doing to make sure they know they count, they are seen, they are valued, and that they bring something. I love what you said. They are at the head of the table. They are not only just invited or at the kids' table, they're there at the front. In closing our time together, I just wondered if you had any words of encouragement, advice for a pastor or a worship leader who is in a church setting where intergenerational is not a word that's used, nor is it necessarily a priority. They enjoy their programs, and they like being in their separate places where it's comfy and warm. What would you say to them in the sense of that get up and go with confidence, and what, I guess, realistic side of it should they expect?
From a worship perspective, and we probably talked around this a lot, but I think it comes from giving space, obviously, to all ages in our worship, and not just making it an adult thing that the kids come to, but making space for everybody, allowing opportunity for involvement. And it also comes from creating a church culture. Again, it can't all begin in it can take place in the sanctuary, but it can't just begin in the sanctuary. It has to be an entire church culture, and that comes from leadership vision to create the kind of culture where generations do nurture each other. We're in a very market-driven society. Demographics are important. You just said 18 to 29-year-olds here a second ago, and I'll let that go. But we tend to really segment society demographically,
No, we do.
and because of that, intergenerational is a very countercultural phenomenon. So we're fighting, we're swimming upstream on this one. But I think that the church is called to be that because we model the kingdom in this world, and the kingdom looks like the kingdom is intergenerational. It's not separate age groups, it's intergenerational. So from a worship standpoint, I think it's including everybody at the table like we talked about, in leadership capacities, making room for a wide variety, and giving each other space.
I like that. Any words?
Well, there's something that happened last Tuesday that I just maybe close, not advice, but just some hope, some encouragement,
No, that's
and a
good.
story that will maybe encourage folks. We're coming up on our 50th anniversary as a church next week. We're celebrating next week. So we've been doing a lot of things during the month of June to celebrate the sacrifice of commitment of a lot of people. Homer McKnight of the McKnight Group is a part of our church, and God used him to build the facility, and he's been on the board for 41 years. How can anybody keep their sanity serving on a Nazarene church board for 41 years? But he got up and he was talking about how God had worked in the past and how excited he was about the future. And he said, I believe this generation can do even more than what's happened the first 50 years. So I met last Tuesday, after that his presentation on Sunday, with about a half dozen young men that I'm discipling and mentoring. They're not staff, they're just part of our church, and they're on fire, they're just growing in the Lord. I asked them, I said, what did you take away from what Homer said? And they said, we are so humbled and blessed to be a part of a church like that, to have that kind of legacy, and we want to build on that vision. And I said, okay, stop right here. I knew at that time there was about 25 of our senior men out in our food court having breakfast together. I said, come here, guys. I took them with me. I said, I want you to say to these men what you just said to me. And they started opening up. It was one of those spontaneous, bumping them together, no program. They just started sharing. And my dad's sitting there, and he said, I think we need to pray now. And I thought my dad would say, you know, let's pray for these young men. He said, no, no, no. Let's have these young men pray for us. And these young guys gathered around, arms around them, in this table. They're all sitting down. We had a prayer meeting for about 15 minutes, and these young men were just bringing heaven down.
Oh,
and they walked out of that setting, and I'm sitting there waiting to see what these seniors are going to say. And one of the most influential on that table, he said, you know what, I don't know what you're thinking, guys, but I'm pretty convicted right now. And I'm going, yes. Because these young men have what I need.
Yeah.
They've got a fire. They've got a fresh faith. My faith has kind of grown a little cold. I need that. See, that's what can happen, Kasey, when God brings the generations together.
Yes, but you were sensitive enough to know and have that, you know, kind of your finger on the pulse beat of your church. I've got these guys over here, sometimes it takes a whole staff to be able to do that, communicating to each other. Here's the need we see, here are the people we have, here's the kids' desire to interact, how do we do this? What beautiful conversations to allow a natural, organic, unforced, unprogrammed event that could be potentially life-changing for both generations that are involved. That's to me, that's the best advice you could ever give, was an opportunity where you seized it, you were obedient, and God blessed it. That's beautiful.
I think God sometimes may find it interesting that we're even having a conversation about being an intergenerational church. It's exactly what you said. The church is intergenerational. And until pastors or leaders start taking that to heart, understanding that, believing it, buying into it, and incorporating it in everything that they do as a leader, as a shepherd of their church, the church will continue to look more and more fragmented, more and more siloed, more and more reflective of our culture. So it's really more about paying attention to how God really structured things in the first place as family. That's why we use the language of adoption. That's why that's so important to us, why we're heirs now, and not just servants in the house. You know, so once we start taking that language to heart, then it starts bleeding out into all kinds of things in our preaching, in our worship styles, in the programs that we pull together, or the events that we do, in the relationships that we generate with other people. The ways we start talking to them start taking on that intergenerational nature like they should.
Well, and I think I appreciate each one of you coming and giving of your time and your experience and just sharing what God has laid on your heart. And I know that as a church body, we all want to live out Philippians 2, where we have that opportunity to be like-minded, to be of one body, one mind, one love, one spirit. And for some of us, it's a little more difficult to reach across the aisle to someone who doesn't look or sound or act or enjoy the same things we do. But isn't that where in our uncomfortable place, God comes in and fills all the gaps and absolutely brings that security and that confidence that we're not supposed to have in ourselves. So isn't it beautiful to give God the glory for what he's doing in each of your churches? And I'll be praying for you, and thank you so much for bringing all this wonderful advice and interaction with us today. You're wonderful.
Thank you, Kasey.
Thanks, Katie.